I got a few questions. Questions. Where do you get your protein from? Isn't it expensive to be vegan? Questions. I got a few questions. Haven't we evolved to eat meat? It's natural. I got a few questions.
Shhh. It's vegan. Thank you guys for joining me on another episode. I'm your host, Manny, and today we're going to talk about the identity crisis of the world. I love talking about this topic because this is that topic that can get you into trouble. Meaning, like, this is the conversation that can get anybody out of a situation and it can get anybody into a situation. And I'll explain what that means. So I like to look at your identity, or the idea of identity, as a tool. And what that means, it can be used for good and it can be used for bad, just like any tool. Let's think about a hammer, for instance. A hammer can hammer in a nail, or it can pound your hand and hurt you. Just very simple example of what a tool can be used for, good or bad. And same thing with the atom. We cracked open the atom and we made a bomb. Think about that. So, again, tools are good or bad. Tools can be used for good or bad. It's all about the person that's using them. Let's talk about identity now. Boom, 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 boom. So, identity, by my definition, is anything you associate yourself with beyond your actual self. So, you have you, which is the blank canvas, and then anything you identify with. Like, for instance, I identify with being Puerto Rican. I identify with being vegan. I identify with being an American. So those are identities. They're little tickets that you put on yourself, and you accumulate them over time. So you're born one way. You're born just completely you, as the you are, and then you slowly acquire these identities. And what that does, it helps us navigate. So that's the positive thing about having an identity. It helps us navigate through the world. It helps us find like-minded people, and then therefore we can expand upon our identity. We can grow and evolve within that identity. Like, for instance, when I first became vegan, what I wanted to do was find other vegans because I wanted to understand what vegans did, what they eat, because I wanted to be vegan. I wanted to be educated on the vegan lifestyle, the culture, what kind of dietary things I need to be aware of. So I sought research and I found people who were very similar to me in the sense of my identity with veganism. Now, I'm not saying that everybody I met was a Puerto Rican vegan, because that would be kind of crazy and that'd be super, super identified. But I did find people who were vegan, and I created this class and this company called the Vegan Gents. And with that company, I created like a live YouTube channel, but in my house with my husband. And what I wanted to do is I wanted to give other vegans or other like-minded people a space to go and learn how to cook, but in person. And they can taste the food, they can help out, kind of like people who just needed a community. So I created this community for people. And it became almost like a beacon, and it grew pretty big. And I started to have an identity crisis. And it wasn't to say that I didn't have a great time, and I love helping people, and I love that idea and that concept. The problem I was having was that I wasn't just vegan. I was also an artist. I was also an educator. I love teaching. So I need to find ways to incorporate that. And I didn't know how to do it because music mixed in with teaching people how to cook vegan food, it didn't make any sense. So I create this separate life. I create these separate lives within my own self. Almost like I compartmentalize my entire existence, my identities. So on one hand, you have me as a vegan. On the other hand, you have me as an artist. And then as you start to accumulate more interests and more identities, you start to compartmentalize everything about your life, like identifying as a parent, identifying as a teacher, identifying as a vegan, identifying as a woman, as a man. You start to get all these identities, and sometimes they conflict with one another. And when these identities, when you're associated with these identities, and they're not getting the nutrients, which I like to call the attention that they need, then they start to agitate inside you, and you start to feel a little displaced, and you don't know why. And that's because you need to have that conversation with yourself and saying, why am I feeling this way? Why am I feeling agitated? Why am I feeling just totally like numbed and almost like I'm in routine? I'm feeling stifled. And you're like, well, it's because I haven't been satisfying this other identity. I haven't been satisfying. I'll give you a quick example. me as a vegan, I spend a lot of time teaching. I spend a lot of time creating recipes, creating curriculums for the class, cleaning up the dishes, all that stuff. That stuff takes a lot of time, But I'm also an artist, but I didn't have enough time to focus on anything artistic in terms of like my music, and therefore I started to get agitated. And when I got agitated, I didn't know what it really was at first, because I was happy doing all these things. I was happy teaching people how to cook. I was happy helping other people find the community. I was happy being vegan, but there was another part of me that just wasn't happy, and I didn't realize it was another identity. And when I sat down and had that conversation with myself and was figuring out, well, what is it about? What is missing in your life? The first thing that came to mind is that I'm just not being creative enough. And I was like, well, you're being creative. What does that mean, being creative enough? And then it popped in my head, I'm not playing the piano as much as I want to. I'm not writing music. I'm not practicing. And then it dawned on me, I was almost like neglecting a child. I was neglecting an identity. And that's when your identity can work against you, especially if you're not having those deep conversations with yourself, because we're so worried about talking to ourselves and sounding crazy. But let me tell you, as you get older, you acquire a lot of identities, especially in your 20s, because you're testing and trying and tasting and licking everything, and you're just accumulating identities. I'm this, I'm that, I'm that. I'm a hippie, I'm an activist, I'm a feminist, I'm a vegan, I'm whatever it is you are. You start to acquire so many identities. And when those parts of yourself aren't being met, because you don't have enough time in the day to give that much attention, especially when we're not taught to time manage. Let me tell you, time management, that'll really help you sort out your identities. Put them all on paper, meaning all the things you identify with, put them all on paper, and making sure you're taking some time to focus on those aspects of yourself. That's how you can avoid a collision of your identities, creating an identity crisis inside you. And so that's one way. That's an exercise, actually, you can do. But the biggest hurdle we have when we start to over-associate with these identities is that we create these walls between other people who don't share the same beliefs or same identities as we do, because we like to call them beliefs, right? You don't believe in the same thing I believe in. Well, it's because you're identified with something different than I'm identified with, and therefore, why would your beliefs fall in the same line in accordance to that subject matter? We can use religion as an example. Like, I'll give you an ignorant example of myself. I wasn't associated with religion at all. I didn't identify with the religious concept or aspect in any concept at all. I identified more with spirituality, just more like oneness and inclusion, not separation or some sort of like, damnation. I didn't associate that. I didn't agree with it at all. And therefore, I disidentified with the concept of religion in all aspects at all. So anytime I came into a conversation with a religious person, I felt so uncomfortable because I could not see myself in them in any way. The moment they said religion, all my walls went up. And all of a sudden it became like this fortress around me. And no matter who they were, no matter how we can identify with one another in different aspects of our lives, I couldn't see that because I was so concerned with this one identity, and that was religion, because that's probably what they most identify with, and that's what I least identify with. And therefore it was conflicting with one another. There could have been 100 other things that we have in common, but you couldn't see those things because I was hyper-focused on the fact that they were religious and I wasn't. And that's an example of how over-associating with your identity can get in the way. It can build walls. It can really build walls between people. It can build walls between nations, between cultures. And right now we have this situation in our world where, immigration is rampant in all parts of the world, and people who don't want other people to come in for whatever reason, legally or illegally, whatever reason it is, I like to believe it's because we have this fear, this concern of how we identify with us being an American or a national, some part of the country, whether it's France, whether it's Germany, whether it's Switzerland, whether it's Australia. If you identify with that country and somebody's coming in, you don't see them identifying the way you see them yourself identified with the country. And so me as an American, I like to believe that America is founded on immigration itself. and the idea of people coming in and introducing their cultures and us adapting their cultures, and we grow and expand. That's what I believe personally. But there are millions of people who don't believe that, which is okay. They identify differently. So they identify with being American, but their definition of American means it means that they fought really hard to get where they are. They didn't get a helping hand. They didn't get any sort of handouts at all. So when somebody just walks into the country, either illegally or legally, there's some sort of resistance because we feel like they haven't earned the right to be here. And it's at that point where we have to ask ourselves the question, are we over-identified with the identification of being an American? And if you're pushing people away, the answer is most likely yes. And I don't mean physically pushing them away back to their country. What I mean is pushing them away from yourself, meaning like you're not being able to connect with people who are, seeking asylum or just trying to, create a better life for themselves because of your identification with being an American, and then your definition of what it means to be an American. It's obviously different. So I think that we all in America there might be a miscommunication behind the definition of what it means to be an American to one another, because we all are arguing, you're not American, you're not patriotic, you're not this, you're not that. And it's not that we find ourselves to be patriotic or American, as I think we are confused with what our definition of that word means. And it means something different to almost everybody. And there's groups that it can mean the same to them, it can mean different to somebody else. And when we're fighting for other people to come in the country, or we're fighting for people to get out of the country, it's because our definitions are different. And when we can talk to each other, when we can put down those walls and we can say, I'm going to disassociate with being an American so I can have a conversation with you. We have to do that because the identification of being an American is getting in the way of building bridges even within our own country, let alone people that are coming from outside the country. So we can't even have a conversation within our own country. So there's no way we're going to have one from people coming outside our country. So what we have to first do is realize that right now, the identification of being American is hindering us from building bridges, within one another, to one another. And because that, we need to first drop those walls down by getting rid of the identification with being American, and we need to be human just for a moment. And then we can re-identify with being American once we understand each other, because then we can have a conversation from a place of intelligence versus a place of ignorance, of just not knowing, each other. So that's kind of like a way that you can use your identity, your obsession, or your over-identification with a certain identity can be used against you, because what it does, it closes you off. It stops you from being able to have conversations with people who don't identify the way you identify. And even if they do identify with the way you identify, they don't have the same definition of that identification. Another weird, quick example is veganism, for instance. I identify with being vegan, but my definition of being vegan is different than probably millions of other vegans. I believe in all-inclusive. I believe that everybody is part of something. I believe that everyone has a journey. That means that even if you're not 100% vegan, but you're still having a conversation with me about vegan food, that's a step in the right direction. There are some vegans who don't believe that. Either all or nothing. And that's okay. But so when I have a conversation with somebody and we both say we're vegan, for some reason we think we both believe the same things. And what happens is that it leads to miscommunication. And we don't ever get anywhere because we're almost fighting against each other in some way. And the best way to understand each other is to remove the word vegan from our identification, and then we can have a conversation from one human to another. Because when we don't, we just continue to fall on top of each other. I'm trying to create a group that allows vegans and non-vegans to come together, and this other person is saying, well, I'll create a group with you. Oh, but I don't want non-vegans there. Because you see what happened? There was a miscommunication between what our definition of being vegan means. So, moving on from that identity. Again, remember, identity is a tool. You can use it for good. You can use it for bad. The good part about identity is you can find like-minded people who help you expand and create. Especially for people who are just becoming like into their own, like people who are publicly identifying with being either homosexual, publicly identifying with being trans, publicly identified with being an artist, publicly identified with being non-gender binary, any of that stuff. You can find like-minded people, a community that helps you grow. But be mindful of the community, because a community that can help you grow can also stifle you, because we get so familiar with that community, we don't know how to communicate with people outside of it. We all know this already. So make sure you keep a plethora of different people in your life, because it is very important, so we can learn about the diversity and the cultures of the world. Think about it like this. When you talk about inbreeding, the reason why inbreeding doesn't work, because it doesn't allow for enough genetic diversity, and then it can cause birth deformalities in children. And you need to mix your genes so you can defend yourself better as a human being. So the same thing when it comes to different identities. You need to mix your identities with other people and people who don't share the same identities with you. And the only way to do that, if you find yourself in a crisis where you just are having a hard time identifying with people who do not identify with the same things you do, like for instance, if you're a vegan and you're having a hard, no, you know what, let's get off of vegan. If you are a Republican and you're having a hard time identifying with Democrats, you're just having a hard time identifying with it, and vice versa. If you're a Democrat and you're having a hard time identifying with Republicans because you just have this definition of what it means to be Republican, so here's what you can do, especially if you don't know anybody yet. So make it easier. So if you ever go to a conference or a meeting, or you're in a room with somebody who's a Republican or a Democrat and you just have an anxiety or hard time being around them, here's what we can do. You want to write on a paper, I am, and then you want to write a long list of all the things you identify with. I'll give you an example. I am a Republican. I am a Democrat. I am a liberal. I am gay. I am straight. Blah, blah, blah. All that stuff. So you want to look at that, right? And then you want to look at that list, and then you want to say, I am identifying with being. And then you can follow up with the word. So I am identifying with being a Republican. I am identifying with being a Democrat. So what that does, it starts to create a disassociation between who you actually are and what you identify with. So you don't take things so personal. So you don't take the idea of you being Republican so personal, and therefore creating this wall between you and people who don't think like you. Because what happens is that we start off as a blank canvas of love and self-expression and wanting to develop and grow, and then we start to acquire these identifications like Republican, liberals, vegans, non-vegans, meat eaters, whatever it is. And then you get so happy, I got an identity, I got something I can call myself. Listen, before you had all those identities, you had you, and that was beautiful. That was enough. You're good. Your identities are just to help you navigate through the world. It is not to tell you who you are. Remember this. So you're not technically a Republican. You're just identifying as a Republican. You're not technically a liberal. You're just identifying as a liberal. Do you understand what I'm saying? And so when you're having a hard time communicating with people who don't have the same party affiliation as you do, try that exercise, right? I am, and you could put a Republican. And then instead of saying I am a Republican, you want to say I am identifying with being a Republican. And then the I is who you are, and everything else after it is just an identification that you chose. And those things will come and go. If you really want to understand this concept, go on YouTube and watch like deathbed confessions, or people that are on their deathbed, the top 5 things that they wish they did. You can bet it isn't what you think it is, because we, as being humans, we try so hard to find who we are when we were born with who we were, and then everything else is just an experience. And when we do that, we create these beautiful symbiotic relationships with people that are so different than us. Now listen, I'm not telling you to accept abuse, to accept people degrading you, to accept people suppressing you, but I am telling you to try to disidentify with things when they get in your way of creating a relationship or communicating with other people, whether it's from a different country, whether it's from a different party, whether it's from a different religion, whether it's from a different tax bracket. Because those things, they come and they go. You don't take them with you. They don't even mean anything when you're on your deathbed. Yeah, it's just the relationships you build that are the most important in this world. And we can only do that by realizing that we're all one. On some level, we're all one. Even molecularly, we're like a huge cell body on Earth. We're all connected. And when we realize that, we can't hate other people because they believe something different than we do. We don't got to tolerate ignorance, but we also don't have to hate people. We can have better conversations. We can ask the right questions from a place of love as opposed to a place of defense and fear and worry and concern. Because trust me, people share more in common with each other than we believe. And there's this quote by Oscar Wilde that says, "We're all in the gutter. Some of us are just looking up at the stars, but you're all in the gutter." And it's beautiful. It's beautiful. I know it sounds crazy, but it's amazing because it makes life so stress-free. You're going to have many problems in your life you're going to have to deal with. Don't create more than you have to. Yeah. All right. Well, I hope you guys enjoyed this identity crisis episode. It's pretty long, but take care. Have an amazing year, amazing week, amazing moment. Until next time, namaste.
I got a few questions. Questions. Where do you get your protein from? Isn't it expensive to be vegan? Questions. I got a few questions. Haven't we evolved to eat meat? It's natural. I got a few questions.
Shh. It's vegan.